Hey, what's going on, friends? Welcome back to Football Therapy with me, your host. Yeah, and I hope you're all doing well. Really hope there's certain few things I would like to discuss from Thomas Tuchel's press conference. He spoke a lot today, ladies and gentlemen. In fact, here he is. Hold on. Here he is. There's Thomas. He's talking, and he had a lot to say, didn't you, Thomas? Huh? There he is next to me. Go away, Thomas. He had lots to say. He's clearly reacting to opinions floating around about Chelsea losing 2 games consecutively. And, you know, it's big news. Chelsea were a powerhouse, certainly in the narrative at the beginning of this season. Oh, Chelsea, Premier League favourites. Can they retain their Champions League title? They bought Lukaku. They're so good. All the players that were decent last year are going to be even better this year. Oh wait, they've got battered by Man City, and they failed to win away against a struggling Juventus, missing 2 of their most important players. Granted, in between all that narrative, there's some important mitigating factors, but for the moment, that's the narrative. So he was ready for a lot of stuff to talk about, and I want to go through it. Some interesting stuff there. Do consider subscribing if you want to this channel. Daily content, of course, at least 1 video a day. And if you want to drop a like, that's really helpful for me. And you can follow me on Instagram at FootballYannick. If you want to. Cool. So let's talk about it. He did just do his presser. He went through a bunch of stuff. I did just write down notes because there's a couple of things, notable things I really wanted to talk about. Firstly, what I did find really interesting is he had a little reaction to the talking about Mason Mount and Reece James called up for Gareth Southgate's England squad. Firstly, when it comes to Mason, he's like, yep, he had a small injury. He's sort of back now. Makes sense that he goes to England and he's considered and he's an important player for England and all that. Fine. But with Reece James, they said, well, isn't he injured? You know, did you have a conversation with Gareth about your injured right back? And he just said, you'd think so, wouldn't you? And I was like, ooh, sassy Tuchel. Perhaps this side of Thomas that people did warn us about might slowly be bubbling under the surface, and he becomes a little bit more, not aggressive, but assertive in particular ways. We'll have to see what happens, because he's been like the perfect diplomat, politician so far, said all the right things. I'm not saying this is saying the wrong things, but he was clearly upset and angry that Gareth Southgate didn't contact him about selecting Reece James, and he says Reece James is training in the water, so this is an error. He's not going, no chance. Do you know what I mean? And I was like, oh, he wasn't really angry, but he was really like putting his foot down like this. Yeah, I found that really interesting. So clearly upset with Gareth Southgate for not contacting him about Reece James, and he sort of said this is an error. He won't go. He's training in the water. Maybe the England side, they think, well, you can train in our water and hang out with the boys. Sounds silly. Not very happy, Tuchel, at that at all. And obviously, Chelsea playing Southampton tomorrow. He spoke at length about Tino Livramento, which of course was always going to be a subject to come up because he's been amazing for Southampton. He's gone from Chelsea's academy to the starting right back at a fairly decent Premier League team, which is a huge jump. People might think, mid-table championship loan or something like that. All this says but obviously he won Chelsea's Academy Player of the Year, and when you're that good in that academy, you're probably good enough to do this. And he slotted right in at Southampton, and he's been a bit of a gem in the Premier League. So, of course, this was always going to be a talking point with Tuchel. And Chelsea, of course, have a buyback clause that was mentioned. Tuchel didn't reference the buyback clause or respond to that as part of the question. But what he did say is that Chelsea really fought to keep Tino Livramento at Chelsea Football Club. He says he thought he was perfect for his right wing back position, and he knows that Reece James and Aspi are in front of him, but he said he'd be get an opportunity to fight and maybe go all the way. I think he was suggesting that Tino Livramento could have become Chelsea's starting right wing back, maybe over Reece James, or given them the opportunity to do that. Which is actually pretty huge. Like, if you ask me. And he was really assertive about this. He spoke about how he knows Ralph Hasenhüttl as well. They've been mates. He says he finds him quite a funny dude, which I find quite cool. They're jovial or together or whatever, but they've been together in Bundesliga. They met up in France, and they meet now at coaches' meetings, of course, in the Premier League. So it's nice to hear they've got a relationship. Hasenhüttl seems like a good dude, but he's taken one of Chelsea's best, or maybe best talents. I think that's fair to say. So Chelsea do have a buyback clause for Tino Livramento. Maybe Tuchel is already seriously thinking about that and saying to the club, this guy is dope. And obviously you'd have to convince Tino himself, who couldn't be convinced to stay. So you'd have to convince him by a transfer with a contract that assures playing time. We're not buying you back to become in the reserves. We're buying you back to start for Chelsea. Which would be massive. Reece James, and maybe a couple of years off yet, because in Chelsea's buyback clauses, generally they have a 2-year waiting thing, like for Nathan Ake, we couldn't buy him back from Bournemouth until 2 years later. We've put the same thing into Tammy Abraham's transfer to Roma. We can't buy him back for 2 years. So Ake, Abraham, you'd imagine the same thing. I can't say this for certain. This is a speculation, but you'd imagine the same thing would be for Tino Livramento. Anyway, so that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Also, he talked about Romelu Lukaku, which was really interesting. The chemistry, or how he started and perhaps not getting the service that he originally got early doors. And he spoke about, look, we've had to switch up the front line and this and that, and he needs to be found and we need to utilise him and all this. But one thing he really did say that was interesting, he said he's got the best chemistry in terms of the players that are on the pitch, that he works best so far, like what we've seen so far and what he's seen in training, I guess, is he has the best chemistry with Mason Mount, who obviously would play up next to him, and Mateo Kovacic, who we know has already given him that beautiful assist, and that sort of diagonal curled ball that he put on the ground, that through ball. So it was really interesting to hear that. They're two players that look for Lukaku, that know his movements already and know how to play with him. And it's really, for me, quite interesting to hear from the coach to, deliberately and quite methodically and assertively say, yeah, he's got the best chemistry with Mason Mount and Mateo Kovacic. So maybe he wants those two on the pitch to really get the best out of big Romelu Lukaku. And he spoke about, look, he has been isolated, but we know he can play well. We've already seen good from him in this Chelsea team. It's not quite crisis talks yet, but it was interesting to hear that maybe he's saying that he seemingly doesn't have chemistry or as much chemistry as I'd like with Timo Werner or Kai Havertz or Hakim Ziyech. I personally feel like Callum Hudson-Odoi would probably do well with him, giving him more conventional service like crosses and cutbacks, like old school strikers, one on your head, or on my boot from the byline, rather than perhaps playing in field and trying to make these through balls. I feel like a wide wingy player like Callum Hudson-Odoi would make sense. And he did speak further on the absence of Mason Mount, because the question came up, and you can tell he's a bit miffed about this. He says he doesn't read the media and stuff, but he clearly does, because this question, it only came up once, and it came up later on in the presser about the absence of Mason Mount, and has that affected Chelsea's form? Of course, he's missed 2 games. Chelsea have lost 2 games, and he went off a little bit. He went off and a bit ranty, and this was kind of the theme largely the theme of the press conference. He spoke about how Mason Mount came off he even sort of dug him out a little bit and said, look, initially, and said Mason Mount came off at half time against Tottenham, and then we battered them in the second half and win 3-0. He didn't have a good half, which is completely fair. That's true. But then he says, look, he is great and we do need him. And he is, he offers that energy that leads by example in the high press. But he said, of course I want him in the team and I love him and I know what he brings. But I think he was quite defensive, and he said, we can win games without Mason Mount. So he's clearly struck a nerve, do you know what I mean? And I'm a Chelsea fan. I adore Mason Mount. I've got him holding the Champions League trophy there on the wall. But yeah, I want us to be able to win games without Mason Mount. I'm not saying he's anywhere near Eden Hazard's level, but I don't want it to become something like Eden Hazard in a more like functional way. Like we need the counter press in the middle third from him or something nerdy like that. I absolutely want to believe that we can win games without Mason Mount. So anyway, he goes on and he says, look, of course I always want N'Golo Kante and Mason Mount available. And he, respect him, he pulled up Christian Pulisic's name as well and talked about sprints and stuff. And I still think there's something very, very valuable for Christian Pulisic. I did like a recent short rant about him here on the channel, so I still really, really value Christian Pulisic as well. Anyway, I wanted to review the presser because I thought there's some really telling stuff in there. Let me know what you think to that subject matter. Please do comment down below on those things I've spoken about. Please do consider dropping a like to show your support, and hey, if you'd like to, consider subscribing. Alright friends, I'm out. Enjoy the football. Peace.